The galaxy had moved on without Earth. The great empires gathered every century to hold their council meetings, where hundreds of alien species sent their ambassadors to discuss trade, laws, and wars that stretched across the stars. The meetings were grand, full of colors and sounds that no single world could imagine, yet there was always one empty chair, left untouched, its nameplate covered in dust and silence. It read only one word: Earth. No one remembered when Earth stopped answering. The Council archives said that humanity had once been present in the early days of expansion, when the first jump drives opened the way to the stars. Humans had been curious, loud, and brave. They had built ships out of metal that burned white through the void. But after a few hundred years, they stopped sending messages. At first, everyone thought it was a temporary silence, perhaps a civil war or a technological fall. But time kept moving and Earth never returned. Generations of alien diplomats came and went, but the seat of Earth stayed cold. Some species pitied the humans, believing they had destroyed themselves as they often warned others they might. Some mocked them, saying the humans were too emotional to survive in a galaxy ruled by logic and power. Others feared them, for the stories of the Terran Wars and the strange human instinct for survival were still told in whispers. Yet as the centuries passed, fear turned into memory, and memory turned into myth. The new children of the galaxy were taught that Earth had been a spark that burned too fast and faded too soon. The Council carried on. Trade lanes were drawn across the stars, colonies rose and fell, and new alliances were born. But in the dark corners of space, some explorers spoke of strange signals near Sol, the ancient home of humanity. They were faint, like echoes of a heartbeat. When scanners tried to read them, the data returned empty, as if the signals bent around detection. Most scientists dismissed it as interference from solar storms, but a few wondered if the old world still breathed. The idea was quietly laughed away in the council halls. No one had time for ghost stories. Over time, the galaxy forgot what it owed to Earth. The humans had been the first to build the universal translators that made diplomacy possible. They had charted dangerous hyperlanes, losing countless ships so others could travel safely. But the names of their explorers faded from maps. Their colonies were renamed under alien control. Even the blue star that had once guided ancient Terran sailors through the night sky, Sirius, was now surrounded by alien mining stations. The galaxy had claimed everything humanity had left behind. On Mars, the ETH Collective built laboratories. They stripped the soil and used the planet's thin atmosphere for research on energy fields. On Jupiter's moons, the Vishar Dominion harvested metals and placed their banners on the frozen ground. When asked why they did not respect the old claims of Earth, they laughed. "A dead race has no rights," their leader once said during a council meeting. "If humanity wanted its world, it should have protected it." No one objected. The council's silence was the final judgment. Still, there were stories whispered by travelers who ventured too close to the Sol system. Some spoke of lights under the clouds of Earth, tiny flickers that moved in patterns too regular to be natural. Others claimed to have seen shadows on the moon, as if great machines crawled across its dark side. A merchant once swore he saw a ship near Neptune that appeared out of nothing and vanished just as fast. The council dismissed these tales as hallucinations caused by radiation, but the story spread. Even the most logical beings could not shake the feeling that something waited there. In a small observatory on the edge of the Andorran Empire, an old scientist named Lorene watched the region of Sol with quiet fascination. Every few years she sent a probe closer, and every time it disappeared. No explosion, no debris, only silence. She noted in her reports that the system was occupied by an unknown force that does not wish to be found. Her reports were ignored by her superiors, who thought she was wasting valuable resources. But she kept sending them one after another, like messages in a bottle cast into the sea of stars. The last probe she sent captured a strange image before it vanished. It was blurred, filled with static, but behind the distortion was something metallic, something shaped like a ship, unlike any she had ever seen. Its design was simple, clean, and silent, with no visible engines or weapons. It seemed to glow with its own light. When Lorene showed the image to the council's data analysts, they erased it from public record and sealed her findings. She was warned not to speak of it again. But the thought haunted her. Earth, the old stories said, had always been patient. Humans were not the fastest or strongest species, but they were persistent. They waited, learned, and adapted. Maybe they were doing that again. Maybe they had never fallen at all. Lorene began to suspect that the silence of Earth was not weakness. It was preparation. Centuries earlier, during the Age of Retreat, when the last known human fleet had left galactic space, one of their admirals made a final broadcast. The message was short and calm. "We are not ready yet. We will return when we are." The Council stored it in their archives, but few ever listened to it again. The words now echoed in Lorene's mind as she stared at the dim blue dot on her screen. She imagined millions of humans beneath those clouds, hidden, rebuilding, watching the stars they once explored. Far away, on a mining station near the edge of the Sol system, a group of Vishar workers uncovered something strange. Beneath layers of asteroid rock, they found what looked like an old human beacon still active. It pulsed faint light and emitted a weak transmission that repeated every 10 seconds. The engineers tried to decode it, thinking it was valuable relic technology, but when they connected their systems to it, their station's power grid collapsed. Before they could repair it, the beacon stopped blinking. 2 days later, every communication line within 1,000,000 kilometers of Sol went dark. The Council received reports of blackouts and missing patrol ships, but before they could send an investigation fleet, the Sol system sealed itself. No signals came out, no scanners could see in. It was as if the entire system had been swallowed by a fog of light. And still the galaxy assumed Earth was dead. The truth was simpler and far more dangerous. Humanity had gone silent not because it was destroyed, but because it had chosen to hide. Deep below Earth's surface, vast cities thrived. Old nations had long faded, replaced by a single quiet purpose. The humans had learned from their mistakes, from their wars, from the arrogance that once divided them. Now they worked as one. They studied energy beyond the limits of physics, built machines that could bend light and ships that could fold space itself. Their silence was their shield. The children of Earth had watched the galaxy laugh at their absence. They saw their world mined, their moon stripped, and their name turned into a myth. But they did not rage. They remembered. They waited. And in the silence of the void, they prepared. When the last signal from the mining station vanished, a small pulse of light blinked deep within the clouds of Earth. It was not a distress call. It was a response. For the first time in 1,000 years, Earth had listened. The skies above the old blue planet remained quiet, but far beneath them, in the great caverns that stretched for miles, humans gathered before a massive screen showing the map of the galaxy. Thousands stood in silence watching the Council's latest broadcast. They heard the Vishar claim Sol is uninhabited. They saw their old flag displayed as a relic of a forgotten race. Then they heard laughter from alien delegates calling humans primitive. No one spoke. They did not need to. Their eyes were steady, their purpose clear. The silence that the galaxy mistook for death was only the breath before the storm. In that silence, Earth was alive. The council meeting on the great station of Varlon began as it always did, with the sound of thousands of voices rising in greeting, and trade deals passing from one language to another, and banners of many colors floating under the dome of light that covered the chamber. But this time there was a strange tension in the air, because of the recent disappearances near the edge of human space. The Vishar Dominion spoke first, saying that the missing ships were nothing but accidents caused by solar storms and unstable warp routes, yet their faces flickered with unease. The ETH Collective followed, saying that the Sol system was old and full of dangerous radiation that could destroy sensors and confuse their scanners. No one mentioned the word that sat unspoken in everyone's mind. Earth. Among the delegates, a few older races remembered the warning that humans once gave before their silence began, a sentence that had been carved into a monument on one of their colonies before it fell. The skies will blaze when humanity returns. For most of the young races it was only a story, but for the old it was a shadow behind their thoughts. The meetings went on for days, but every time a new message came from the outer systems, it brought more bad news, more lost fleets, more trade routes cut off by invisible walls of light that no one could explain. The Vishar decided to send a stronger expedition to Sol to claim it officially as their territory. Their leader, Grand Marshal Karan, said that it was better to take control before someone else did. He stood before the council and said in a deep voice that echoed across the chamber that humanity had its time, and now the galaxy must move forward. Many agreed because they wanted the resources in the system, its rich asteroids, its moons, and its planets that could be used for experiments. No one spoke against it, not even the quiet members of the smaller alliances who feared the Vishar. They thought that silence was safety. In the following months, a great fleet moved through space toward Sol. The fleet was made of dark ships with glowing red engines and sharp wings built for war. The crews were confident. Some even laughed about the stories of ghosts and hidden humans. They said they would bring back relics to sell, maybe an old human flag or weapon to display in their halls. When they reached the border of the system, they saw the familiar sight of the sun burning bright and the planets turning slowly in their orbits. At first, everything seemed normal. The scanners showed no life signs, no heat, no signal, only the quiet hum of background radiation. They moved forward slowly and began to deploy drones. The first drone entered the orbit of Mars and began to transmit images of the old research stations built by the ETH Collective. The buildings were gone, melted as if by fire that left no smoke. The surface of the planet looked smooth and dark like glass. The Vishar commander thought it was the result of a solar flare. But then the drone's camera turned toward the horizon and caught something strange. There were symbols carved into the ground so large they could be seen from orbit. Lines that formed a pattern like a circle with wings. The crew could not understand it. The translation systems failed. When the commander tried to zoom in, the signal cut off and the drone went silent. Moments later, the ship's sensors went blind. All screens turned white for a second. Then static filled the room. The commander shouted orders, but before anyone could respond, the ship began to shake. Outside the window, the stars seemed to bend. A light, soft at first, began to rise from the direction of Earth. It grew brighter, expanding across the darkness until it filled the entire view. The crew covered their eyes. When the light faded, Earth was still there, shining faintly blue and calm, but all the other ships in the fleet were gone. Only one remained, drifting without power. The surviving crew sent a distress signal, their voices shaking as they tried to explain what had happened. They said they saw shadows moving across the surface of Earth, long shapes that glowed for a moment and disappeared. The signal reached the nearest outpost before it was cut. The message lasted only 30 seconds, but it was enough to spread fear. The council tried to hide it, but news always found a way. Soon, every corner of the galaxy whispered again about the humans and their promise. Meanwhile, on the surface of Earth, far below the clouds, the hidden cities were alive with energy. The people of Earth watched through their massive screens as the Vishar fleet entered their system. They had been waiting for this moment for centuries. The leaders of the new unified Earth stood in a silent chamber made of dark glass, each of them wearing simple uniforms with no ranks. At the center stood a tall woman with silver hair and calm eyes, who was known only as the Director. She raised her hand and gave a single command, not to attack, not to speak, only to show. In that moment, the great planetary shields that had hidden Earth for 1,000 years shimmered faintly, enough for the intruders to see a glimpse of what lay beneath the clouds before they were gone. It was a warning, nothing more. The people of Earth had no wish for conquest. They remembered too well the wars that had almost destroyed them. But they also remembered the pain of being forgotten, of watching the galaxy steal their home piece by piece. They had waited, studied, and built quietly. Their technology was beyond what any empire could imagine. They could move their ships without engines, power their cities with the energy of stars, and control matter with a thought. They had no armies in the old sense, only defense systems that reacted instantly to threat. To them, the attack of the Vishar was not war. It was a signal that the galaxy still believed Earth was weak. In the following days, more fleets tried to reach Sol, some to investigate, others to claim revenge for the missing ships. None returned. The council began to argue. Some said it was the Vishar's fault for provoking an unknown force. Others demanded that the region be sealed and declared forbidden. But curiosity was stronger than fear. New explorers sent unmanned probes, each one vanishing as soon as it entered the system. Scientists tried to explain the phenomenon as a natural distortion, caused by ancient human weapons. But deep down they all knew that no natural force behaved with such precision. In a quiet corner of the council archives, Lorene, the old scientist who had once studied the Sol system, read the reports with a heavy heart. She knew this was not random. She remembered the last probe she sent, the one that vanished after showing a glimpse of a ship that glowed like a star. She knew what was coming. She tried to warn her superiors again, saying that Earth was alive and watching, but they laughed and called her superstitious. Still, she sent one final message into the void, a transmission addressed directly to Earth. She spoke simply, saying that not all of the galaxy had forgotten them, that some still respected what they once were, and she asked only for understanding. The message was sent, but no answer came. Far away in the deep core of Earth's defense network, her message was received and stored. The director read it in silence and smiled faintly. She whispered to her officers that there were still voices in the galaxy worth listening to. Then she turned back to the screen showing the map of the stars. Red dots marked every fleet that had entered Sol and vanished. Around them, the network of human ships moved unseen. Their purpose was not destruction, but control, to ensure that no one crossed the line again. On the council station, the debates grew louder. Panic began to spread among the outer worlds as trade routes near human space collapsed. Merchants refused to travel, and rumors claimed that entire convoys had been erased by beams of light that appeared from nowhere. Eighth researchers who once studied Mars demanded protection, saying that their colleagues had gone missing. The council tried to calm everyone, declaring that an investigation fleet would be formed, but no one wanted to volunteer. The fear of the unknown had returned to the galaxy. The same fear that humans once felt when they first looked at the stars now haunted those who thought themselves the masters of it. The irony was quiet but deep. Every empire had once looked down on Earth, calling it backward, small, and emotional. Now they could not even see it. One night, as the council station orbited its twin suns, a strange phenomenon occurred. Every communication screen across the galaxy flickered for a brief second. A line of text appeared, old and simple, written in the human alphabet that only historians could still read. It said, "We see you." Then it vanished. The council tried to trace its source but failed. Some said it was a prank, others said it was a warning. The galaxy waited in uneasy silence. On Earth, the director watched the same message being sent across the stars. Her scientists had confirmed that it had reached every major communication hub simultaneously. It was not meant to threaten. It was meant to remind. The humans were not gone. They had simply chosen when to speak. The sky above Earth shimmered faintly as the defense grid powered down to standby, revealing the stars again for the first time in centuries. The people stood in the open air, looking up, knowing that the galaxy now remembered them, and somewhere far away the council sat in fear, wondering if the silence they had mocked had been the calm before something far greater than war. And deep in the void between worlds, the ships of Earth moved unseen, carrying with them the weight of history and the quiet promise that the next time the galaxy came for them, the skies would indeed blaze. The galaxy had not known peace since the return of the strange lights from the Sol system, because every empire that had once laughed at Earth now lived in quiet, fear and confusion as fleets vanished and stations went silent and no one could explain what was happening. The council tried to keep order, but every meeting turned into shouting and blame, while the outer colonies began to prepare for something they could not name. Rumors spread faster than light, saying that Earth was back and that humanity had awakened from its long sleep. Some said they had seen the new human ships appear from nowhere, and others swore that they had spoken to voices that came through their radios, without warning, telling them to stay away from Sol. The galaxy had lived for centuries without fear of one small blue world, but now every leader felt its shadow. On a quiet moon near the edge of the Orion Arm, a research base of the ETH Collective picked up a strange transmission that was repeating on an old Terran frequency. It was weak and broken, but the words could still be heard between the static, saying, "We warned you once and we are warning you again." The scientists tried to trace it, but every time they locked onto the signal, it moved like something alive. The leader of the station called the council for help, but the council told him to ignore it because it was probably interference from the magnetic storms. Still, the signal continued and grew stronger each hour, until the night sky above the moon filled with faint blue lights that moved like waves. The crew watched in silence, unable to speak because they knew this was not a storm. At the same time, in the deep halls of the council station, the leaders of the galaxy gathered again because too many ships had gone missing, and too many colonies were reporting strange lights and shadows that moved across their scanners. The Vishar representative demanded that the council send a united armada to destroy whatever force was hiding in Sol, but the smaller races refused, saying that they did not want to fight a ghost. The ETH scientists tried to explain that the energy readings near Earth were beyond known science, because it was as if the planet itself was covered in a living shield that bent space around it. No one believed them until they showed the data. and the room fell silent because the image on the screen showed Earth glowing softly beneath its clouds as if it were awake. The head of the council, a tall being made of light named Serath, stood and said that no more blood would be spilled until they knew the truth. She ordered a final diplomatic attempt and asked for a volunteer to lead the mission. No one moved until a small hand rose from the back of the room. It was Lorene, the old scientist who had studied Sol for decades. She said that if humanity was alive, then maybe they would listen to a voice that spoke with respect. Some laughed and said she was chasing ghosts again, but Serath allowed it. Within a day, Lorene was aboard a small diplomatic cruiser heading toward the edge of human space. The ship carried only a small crew and no weapons. They moved slowly through the darkness, watching the stars shift as they passed the last known trade routes. The silence grew heavier the closer they came to Sol. When they reached the boundary where the other fleets had vanished, the pilot hesitated, but Lorene told him to continue. The sensors began to fail one by one, and the lights dimmed, but the ship did not explode or burn. Instead, everything became quiet and calm. Outside the window, the stars faded until there was only darkness, and then a single point of blue light appeared ahead. It was Earth. Lorene felt her heart tremble as she looked at it, because it was beautiful and strange at the same time. The oceans glowed faintly and the clouds shimmered with colors that no storm could make. The pilot said that there were no readings at all, no radio signals, no life forms, not even energy. It was like looking at a perfect illusion. Then, the blue light from the planet pulsed once like a heartbeat, and a voice filled the cabin. It was clear and calm and spoke in the old human language that Lorene had studied all her life. It said, "You should not have come, but you will not be harmed." The crew froze as the ship began to move on its own, pulled gently toward orbit. As they entered the shadow of the planet, they saw massive structures rising from the surface like mountains made of glass and metal, shining softly in the night. They saw lights moving across the sky like silent birds. Lorene realized that Earth had changed beyond imagination. The voice spoke again, saying, "You have come with questions, and we have answers, but the time for talk is ending." Lorene asked who was speaking, and the voice said, "We are what remains of humanity and what it has become. We watched you take our world, and we watched you build your empires upon the ruins of ours. We waited for the day when you would come, not with curiosity, but with greed. That day has passed." Lorene tried to explain that not all of the galaxy had forgotten them and that many wanted peace. But the voice said peace cannot come from those who do not remember the cost of war. Then the planet below them shone brighter, and the sky filled with lines of light that stretched far into space, forming shapes that looked like ships, but larger than anything the Council had ever built. The pilot gasped and said that there were thousands of them surrounding the system, and they were moving outward. Lorene realized that Earth was not just defending itself, it was expanding. The ship's systems came alive again, and the voice said, "You will return and tell them that this is not a warning but a truth. The galaxy will change. Humanity does not seek revenge, but balance. If they leave us in peace, we will leave them in peace. If they bring war, we will answer once. After that, there will be silence again." The light faded, and the ship turned away from the planet. In a blink, they were back outside the system with their sensors working as if nothing had happened. Lorene looked at the data and saw that only 1 hour had passed, though. By her feeling, it had been many days. She sent a message to the Council with everything she had seen and heard. When the Council received her message, they played it in secret because they feared panic. But somehow it leaked, and within a week the whole galaxy had heard the voice of Earth. Some said it was a trick, some said it was the truth, but no one could ignore it. The smaller races began to withdraw their colonies from human space, and the Vishar demanded that the Council prepare for war. Their leaders said that no single world could threaten the galaxy, and that if they acted now, they could destroy Earth before it grew stronger. They assembled a massive fleet of warships and called it the Burning Lance. The fleet gathered near the edge of the Orion Arm, with hundreds of ships from different empires joining out of fear or pride. They moved together toward Sol like a storm. On Earth, the people watched them come without fear. The director stood before the great screen and whispered that this was the final test. The defense network awakened, and the sky around Earth lit with a soft white glow. The fleet entered the system and prepared to fire, but before they could, a wave of light spread from Earth faster than thought. Every ship went dark at once. Engines stopped, weapons failed, and the crews sat in silence as their ships drifted powerless. Then every screen showed the same image, the blue planet shining peacefully. The voice of humanity spoke again, saying, "This is your answer. Remember it." When power returned, the fleet was already outside the system as if they had never entered it. Their captains could not explain how they had been moved. The council called them back in shame and confusion. The Vishar leader Koran refused to believe what had happened and ordered a second attack, but his own ships refused to follow. Fear had spread deeper than any command could reach. Across the stars, people began to whisper that the promise of retribution was real. Lorene watched all this from her observatory with tears in her eyes because she understood now that humanity had not sought destruction. They had only wanted to be left alone until they were ready to return. But now the galaxy had forced them to reveal their strength. She sent one last message to Earth, thanking them for sparing the fleets and promising that she would tell the truth to anyone who would listen. For a long time there was no reply, and then one day she found a small object outside her station drifting in space. It was a crystal cube, with the emblem of old Earth carved on it, and inside was a single line of text saying, "You listened, and for that, we remember you." The galaxy entered a strange quiet after that. No more fleets vanished, but no one dared approach Seoul again. Trade routes were redrawn around it, and the council declared it a forbidden zone, though everyone knew the reason was fear, not law. The empires continued their games of power, but always with one eye on the distant blue star that had once been forgotten, and now burned in their memories. And on that blue world, the humans continued their work in silence, watching the stars where the council's ships once flew, and waiting for the day when the galaxy would be ready, not for war or for submission, but for understanding. The skies above. Earth were calm, but beneath that calm burned a promise that if the galaxy ever forgot again, the heavens would blaze once more. The Galactic Council Hall stood quiet for the first time in centuries because no one knew what to say. After the events at Sol, and even the proud Vishar Dominion kept their heads low because the entire fleet they had sent to punish Earth had returned powerless and humiliated, and there were still no answers for what had truly happened. The recordings from the fleet were full of light and static, showing only the image of the blue planet and the calm voice that had spoken through every ship at once, telling them that balance had been restored. The message had spread across every world faster than any government could control it, and now the citizens of 1,000 species whispered the same thing, that humanity had returned. The council tried to control the panic by declaring that Earth was under quarantine, and that no one was allowed to enter the Sol system without permission, but no one dared to try anyway. Inside the council chambers, the leaders argued again because no one wanted to admit that one lost world had outmatched them all. The ETH Collective demanded that the council send diplomats to talk before misunderstanding turned into war, but the Vishar Dominion shouted that there could be no peace with a race that hid weapons powerful enough to crush fleets in seconds. The smaller worlds begged for calm because they were afraid that another war would destroy them first. At last, the head of the council, Sarath, silenced them and said that there would be no more fleets and no more threats until they knew what humanity wanted, because if they guessed wrong, there might not be a council left to speak. A week later, every communication channel across the galaxy flickered at once. Screens went black, then bright, and a symbol appeared that only historians could read because it was written in the old human language. It was the seal of Earth, a blue circle with a white line through it, and then a face appeared. It was a woman with pale eyes and silver hair, and she spoke calmly without emotion. Her words were simple and clear. "You have taken from us, and we have taken nothing from you. You have judged us without understanding. We watched while you built your peace over our silence, but now you will remember who we are." The council chamber filled with that voice, and even the strongest leaders felt cold, because the woman spoke with no anger and no hatred, only certainty. She said, "We will not attack, but we will no longer be ignored. The era of Earth's silence is over." Then the signal ended, and the symbol of Earth burned like a white star before fading. All across the galaxy, lights appeared in the night skies above worlds that had once used Earth's resources. Some were bright streaks across the atmosphere that vanished as quickly as they came. Others were silent flashes above the horizon, On some worlds, satellites stopped working and power grids shut down for a few moments before returning. The message was clear. Earth was not hidden anymore. They could reach anywhere at any time. The people on those worlds stared upward, afraid to sleep because they thought the blue planet itself might appear above them next. On Earth, the director watched the galaxy's response through the great observation network that stretched from the moon to the edge of the solar system. Her face stayed calm, but her eyes showed sorrow because she knew that humanity had crossed the line from being a forgotten myth to being a living threat. She told her advisors that they would not harm anyone unless attacked again, and that their strength was a shield, not a sword. But she also said that the galaxy needed to understand that the age of arrogance was over. She ordered the human fleets to remain hidden, but to make their presence known whenever a ship approached the forbidden zone. They called this plan the Veil. The Veil worked silently and perfectly. Whenever an alien ship tried to test the border of Sol, it would suddenly find itself turned around. Its navigation systems reset, its crew unaware that hours had passed. The commanders began to call it the Wall of Light. None who crossed it ever saw what was inside. Some tried again and again out of pride, but every time the same thing happened until even the bravest captains gave up. The council received countless reports and complaints, but they had no power to act. The only thing they could do was talk and hope that Earth was listening. Months passed, and still the galaxy could not return to normal. Trade routes that passed near Sol were empty because merchants were too frightened to travel there. The Vishar economy began to collapse because their mining stations near Jupiter were gone, and no one dared rebuild them. The ETH Collective tried to contact Earth directly using ancient human frequencies, but they received no answer. Some of their scientists believed that Earth was testing them to see how they would react, while others thought humanity was simply watching in silence. Again, among the people of the smaller colonies, something unexpected began to grow. Instead of fear, some began to feel respect. Stories of human bravery and sacrifice that had been forgotten for generations returned to the public voice. Songs from ancient Earth spread through the networks, and even children on distant worlds started to learn the old language again. They called it the Age of Remembering. To many, it felt like a new faith, not worship, but admiration for the species that had risen from ashes and faced the galaxy without flinching. Inside the council station, Sarath watched all this with worry. She knew that chaos would come if the empires began to lose control of their people's beliefs. She decided that there must be direct contact with Earth before rumors destroyed what little order was left. She called Lorene, the scientist who had once visited Sol, and asked her to help again. Lorene agreed because she still believed that humanity did not want war. She began to study the old transmission again, trying to find a way to reach the hidden channels that Earth might still use. While she worked, strange things began to happen across the galaxy. A massive asteroid that had been drifting toward a populated world suddenly changed direction without explanation and passed safely away. A medical ship lost in a nebula reappeared near its home planet, guided by an unknown beacon that matched an old Terran distress code. The Council realized that humanity was not only watching, but sometimes helping. This confused everyone even more because it meant that Earth was choosing when to act and when to stay silent. The galaxy no longer knew whether to fear or to trust. One evening, as Lorene sat alone in her lab trying to decode a signal that kept repeating in her systems, the lights flickered and a figure appeared on her screen. It was the same woman who had spoken to the galaxy. The director looked at her quietly and said, "You have spoken with respect before, and we have not forgotten." Lorene asked why they had come back now after so many centuries. The director said because the galaxy needed to remember that peace built on pride cannot last. She said that humanity had learned in its silence that true power is patience, and that they had watched the Council repeat the same mistakes that once destroyed old Earth. Lorene asked what would happen next, and the director said, "Change." The next day, the Council received a direct invitation. It came as a burst of energy that formed a hologram of Earth's seal and a single sentence saying, "The Council is welcome to witness the dawn." Sarath decided to go herself despite the protests of the other leaders. She took a small ship and only a few guards and entered Sol under the guidance of coordinates sent by Earth. When she arrived, she saw the planet for the first time with her own eyes and understood the fear and awe that others had felt. It was alive with light, oceans glowing, clouds moving in strange patterns that seemed almost like living things. She saw massive towers rising from the continents and rings of satellites forming shapes like wings around the world. When she landed, she was met by humans who looked calm and strong, dressed in simple white suits with no weapons. They led her through vast halls made of clear metal, where rivers of light flowed under the floors. The director greeted her and said, "Welcome back to Earth." Serath felt small standing before her because the air itself seemed to hum with energy. The director told her that humanity did not wish to rule or to destroy, but to guide and to protect what was left of the galaxy's hope. She said that the time of conquest was ending because humanity had seen where that path leads. Serath asked if Earth would join the council again, and the director smiled faintly and said not yet, because the galaxy was still not ready to listen without fear. She said that Earth would remain apart until the others learned humility. She handed Serath a crystal sphere that glowed softly and said, "This will help you when the next storm comes. It will remind you that silence is not absence and that patience is not weakness." Then she led Serath back to her ship and watched as it rose through the blue sky and vanished into the stars. When Serath returned to the council, she told them everything, but few believed her. They said it was a trick meant to make them obey. Yet when she placed the crystal on the table, it began to project images of stars and new routes through space that were faster and safer than any they had used before. The council could not explain it. Soon every empire began to use those routes and trade began to recover. Slowly the fear began to fade and whispers of war quieted. Still the memory of the blazing skies and the calm voice of Earth remained. Across the stars, people looked upward at night, wondering when humanity would speak again. And on the blue planet, the director stood on a high platform, watching the lights of the city below, and whispered that the promise had been kept because the galaxy now remembered, and that was enough for now. The stars burned quietly above the galaxy, and for the first time in centuries there was no war. The Galactic Council met again under calmer skies, and even the proud empires spoke softly, because everyone remembered what had happened when they had tried to test Earth. The new trade routes given by the crystal sphere had changed everything. Travel between worlds was faster and safer, and many lives were saved from the dangers of deep space. People began to say that maybe humanity had returned not for revenge but to give hope. Yet deep inside the council halls there was still fear, because no one understood why Earth had given them such a gift and what they might ask for in return. Serath sat alone in her chamber, looking at the stars through the great window. The crystal sphere still rested on her table, glowing faintly as if alive. Sometimes it changed color when she spoke near it, and she wondered if it could hear her. She had kept her promise to the director and told no one about the deeper message hidden inside the gift. The director had whispered before she left that one day a storm would come from beyond the known stars, and that the galaxy would need to stand together. Serath did not tell the council because she knew they would not believe her until it was too late. Far beyond the rim of the galaxy, a new presence began to move. Silent ships made of dark metal glided through the void, leaving trails of strange energy behind them. They were not part of any known empire. Their movements were cold and exact, and they did not answer any signals. They were called the Null because their ships absorbed light and their weapons left no trace. The first to see them was a small research station near the edge of ETH space. The station sent a single warning before it vanished into static. When the ETH government tried to investigate, they found only fragments floating in the dark and strange marks on the wreckage that no one could read. The council called an emergency meeting. Panic spread fast because the Null were moving inward toward inhabited systems. Fleets were sent to intercept them, but every battle ended the same way. Ships vanished without explosion, as if swallowed by shadows. Whole sectors went silent. Serath knew then that the storm the director had spoken of had come. She asked for help from Earth, but there was no answer. The veil around Sol remained quiet, and no signal passed through. Some said that humanity had abandoned them again. Others said they were watching to see what the galaxy had learned. On Earth, the director stood in the central chamber deep under the surface, watching holograms of the advancing threat. Her scientists had detected the Null months earlier and had been preparing silently. She knew they were not from any known origin, because their energy signatures did not match anything in the galaxy. They came from beyond, from a place outside time's memory. Humanity had expected that one day something like this would happen because they had seen hints of it in the ancient data before their fall. The director ordered the fleets to remain hidden until the right moment. She said the galaxy must first understand unity before power could save it. As the Null moved closer, worlds began to fall silent, one after another. The V-Shar Dominion lost half their colonies in a week and begged the Council for help. The ETH fleets were scattered, and their leader, Lorene, sent desperate messages asking if Earth still listened. Serath finally decided to act. She gathered representatives of every surviving world and told them the truth about her meeting with the director. Many were angry that she had kept it secret, but she said that now was not the time for blame. She showed them the crystal again and said that it contained more than roots. It contained a map of something greater. When she activated the hidden code, the crystal expanded and projected an image of the galaxy, surrounded by a faint barrier of light. The humans had built something no one had ever seen, a network of energy lines hidden through space like invisible rivers connecting the stars. It was called the Skyweb. The director had told her that it was made to protect, not to rule. If the galaxy united their power could awaken the Skyweb fully, and it would become a shield strong enough to stop any invader. Serath told them that this was the reason humanity had given them the trade routes, because the routes were part of the web. If they worked together, they could link every system through harmony instead of conquest. At first, the leaders hesitated, because they feared giving power to something they did not control. But then another message came from the frontier showing the null fleets erasing entire planets. That broke the pride of even the strongest empires. They agreed to follow Serath's plan. Massive transmitters were built across the galaxy using the old human designs that had been rediscovered. Scientists and engineers from dozens of species worked side by side for the first time in history. They sent energy through the roots, and slowly lines of blue light began to appear across the star maps. The Skyweb was waking. On Earth, the director watched the progress and smiled faintly. She ordered the human fleets to stand by because she knew the Null would not stop until they reached Sol. When they finally appeared at the edge of the system, their ships blotted out the stars. There were thousands of them, and they moved like one being. The director opened a single channel and spoke softly. She said, "You have come far, but this sky belongs to life, and we will not let it fall into silence again." The Null did not answer, but their ships began to move forward. Then the veil shimmered and parted, and the human defense network came alive. From the moons of Jupiter to the orbit of Neptune, vast platforms rose from their hidden stations, firing streams of light that joined together like a net of fire. The first wave of Null ships was caught in the energy and froze as if time had stopped. The rest began to fire beams of dark energy that bent around the human shields. For the first time, the galaxy saw the true strength of Earth. The battle lasted hours, but it was seen across the stars because the Skyweb carried the light of it everywhere. People on distant worlds looked up and saw the night turn blue and white. Serath stood in the council chamber watching the feed and whispered that this was the blazing promise the director had spoken of. Humanity was not just defending itself, but defending everyone. As the Skyweb fully awakened, it spread its energy across the galaxy, forming barriers around key worlds and cutting off the Null's advance. The combined fleets of the Council joined the fight, guided by the routes that Earth had given them. For the first time in history, every species fought side by side, not out of fear of each other, but out of shared hope. The director watched in silence as the human fleets pushed forward. She knew that every move had to be precise because the Null were not alive in the normal sense. They were machines of pure void driven by an ancient command to consume energy. She realized that destroying them would not be enough because they would always return from the darkness beyond. So she gave a new order. The Skyweb was to be transformed into a prison of light that would surround the galaxy and trap the Null outside forever. It was a dangerous plan because if it failed, the web might collapse and destroy everything. The scientists on Earth and the allied worlds worked together without rest. They synchronized their systems and linked the energy flows. Slowly, a barrier of light began to rise from the edges of known space, forming a massive sphere that shimmered like dawn. The Null tried to break through, but the combined power of the web held them back. When the last of their fleets reached the barrier, it met the full strength of the united galaxy. The explosion of light that followed was seen even in the darkest corners of space. When it faded, the Null were gone and silence returned. The Skyweb stabilized and became a living shield that glowed faintly around the galaxy. The stars inside shone brighter, and travel became easier than ever before. The Council declared that the age of separation was over. They created a new charter called the Concord of Light, built on unity and respect among all species. Serath became its first leader, but she always said that the true leader was the one who had stayed silent and watched from afar. On Earth, the director stood once more at the observation deck, watching the blue glow of the skyweb above the planet. She knew the galaxy was safe for now, but she also knew that peace had to be guarded carefully. She whispered that humanity's promise of retribution had been fulfilled not through destruction, but through remembrance. The skies that once burned with fear now blazed with light and hope. The world that had missed every meeting had returned not to demand power, but to teach it. As the dawn rose over the cities of Earth, the people looked up at the shimmering sky and smiled, because they knew that their silence had ended forever and that somewhere across the stars countless beings were doing the same. The galaxy had never been so quiet and so alive at the same time. After the battle against the Null and the awakening of the skyweb, every world had learned something important. Strength alone did not protect them, but unity did. The Galactic Council had changed its rules, forming new alliances and agreements that emphasized cooperation over conquest. Even the proud Vishar Dominion, who had once demanded that Earth be destroyed, now worked alongside the smaller races to rebuild what had been lost. The galaxy was still wary, but for the first time in centuries, it felt safe. On Earth, the director watched from the observation platform high above the main city. The skyweb's glow stretched from the outer reaches of the Sol system, a constant reminder of the planet's power and vigilance. She had walked through the corridors of the hidden cities below, where people worked quietly but tirelessly, maintaining the systems that now protected not just Earth but the entire galaxy. She knew that her people had waited a long time for this moment. Humanity had endured centuries of being forgotten, laughed at, and taken for granted. Now they had shown the galaxy that patience and preparation were just as powerful as weapons of war. The people of Earth had changed as well. Gone were the divisions of the past, the petty rivalries that had once split nations. Humanity had learned to act as one, guided by the understanding that survival required cooperation, intelligence, and restraint. The children of the new Earth grew up studying the stars, learning not just the sciences of old, but the history of their ancestors, the mistakes and victories that had shaped a species that could have been lost, but had chosen to endure. Schools now taught not only mathematics and technology, but philosophy and the value of life beyond their world. Across the galaxy, the Council worked to integrate the new knowledge that humanity had shared. The skyweb became a tool for communication, travel, and even education. Races that had once ignored one another now exchanged ideas freely, inspired by the humans who had endured in silence for centuries. Scientists from the ETH Collective, who had once scoffed at the old legends of Earth, now collaborated with human engineers to improve energy grids and transportation systems, learning new ways to harness and control energy without destruction. Ships traveled faster and safer, and trade flourished in ways the galaxy had not seen in generations. Even the Vishar, who had initially resisted all contact with Earth, began to understand the lesson that humanity had offered. Their fleets were reorganized not to intimidate but to protect. Their leaders had learned humility. They no longer sought to dominate, because they had seen what happened when they underestimated a silent world. In secret, many of their young officers began studying Earth history and human strategy, hoping to understand the patience and foresight that had allowed a small blue planet to survive against the odds. The director knew, however, that the galaxy's memory was short. Fear and greed were not easily erased, and there would always be those who tested limits. She convened the leaders of Earth's fleets in the central chamber, explaining that vigilance must continue. "We did not win because we were the strongest," she said. "We won because we waited, watched, and acted with purpose. Our silence was our shield. Now our responsibility is to ensure that the galaxy never forgets what patience and unity can achieve." Her officers nodded, fully aware that even in peace their mission was far from complete. Meanwhile, in the outer systems, scouts reported unusual activity. Strange energy readings that did not belong to any known race were detected at the fringes of explored space. The director studied the readings carefully. They were faint, almost imperceptible, but she knew that the galaxy was not empty. Something else existed beyond the charts of humanity, waiting, observing, Humanity had survived the arrogance of other species, but the universe was vast and there would always be challenges beyond their understanding. She made a decision. The fleets would remain not as conquerors but as guardians, prepared to respond to threats before they could harm the innocent. Back on Earth, the people celebrated quietly, without extravagance. They knew their survival was not a reason for vanity. There were no parades or triumphal monuments, only an understanding that they had reached a point of balance. Streets were lit with soft lights. Schools and universities thrived, and the skies above glowed with faint energy from the skyweb. Children looked up and pointed at the stars, imagining the adventures of humanity among them, not as conquerors but as stewards of life. In the Galactic Council, discussions continued. Even the most skeptical empires began to trust Earth's guidance. They shared knowledge about energy, physics, and space navigation that had been hoarded for centuries. Civilizations that had once fought over small disputes now collaborated to solve larger problems, like environmental restoration on damaged planets and the exploration of uncharted systems. Earth's influence grew not through domination, but through wisdom, teaching that a species could be powerful yet merciful, vigilant yet patient. The director received countless messages from council members and leaders across the galaxy, many of them seeking advice or guidance. She responded selectively, always mindful not to overstep, always teaching rather than commanding. Humanity's role was no longer to interfere in the petty disputes of the galaxy, but to serve as a steady presence, a reminder of what could be achieved when patience and preparation were valued over pride and impulse. The skyweb became more than a shield. It became a lifeline. Ships could travel instantly across great distances, carrying messages, goods, and people with unmatched speed. Scientists used it to share discoveries in real time, while explorers navigated regions previously thought unreachable. Even the arts flourished as cultures mixed, inspired by the stories of humanity's endurance and the shared hope that had spread across the stars. The galaxy began to feel connected in a way it never had before, not through conquest but through mutual respect. One evening, as the sun set over the oceans of Earth, the director stood on a high balcony overlooking the city. The lights of the skyweb shimmered faintly on the horizon, visible to those who knew where to look. She thought about the centuries of silence, the waiting, the lessons learned, and the promises kept. Humanity had finally returned not to dominate but to teach, not to destroy but to guide. She knew that vigilance must continue, but for now the galaxy was safe. For now, the promise of retribution had transformed into a promise of guardianship. And as the stars above Sol sparkled in their familiar patterns, humanity looked outward with calm determination. They had endured the mockery, the neglect, and the challenges of time itself. Now they stood as a quiet but unyielding presence in the galaxy, a reminder that patience, preparation, and unity were more powerful than fleets of warships or empires of pride. The skies above Earth were no longer just blue. They were alive with light and promise, a symbol to all that a species once forgotten could rise again and change the course of history without striking a single blow. In every corner of the galaxy, beings spoke in awe of Earth's return. Stories passed from colony to colony, from merchant to scientist, and from soldier to child. Humans were no longer just a race. They were a lesson, a living example of the balance between strength and restraint. The director's voice, calm and steady, echoed silently in the hearts of many. The galaxy is not ours to conquer. It is ours to protect. And as long as humanity remembered that, the promise of retribution had become the promise of hope. The people of Earth, standing beneath the endless sky, felt it too. For the first time in their long history, they understood that survival was not only about fighting but about waiting, watching, and choosing the right moment. The galaxy had seen their patience and learned to respect it. And as night fell over the planet, the glow of the skyweb stretched across the heavens, reminding everyone that the blue world had returned and that its promise of vigilance, protection, and unity would shine for all time.